Let me tell a little story, true story, that maybe can hammer home something of the weight of this word, amen. There was a minister some hundreds of years ago who was traveling to a far-off village in England to preach, and as he left, he had to work his way through some wilderness, some wild country. And, kind of on the edge of that, he made one last stop so he could feed his horse and get everything ready with his carriage. And as he was leaving that place, a man walked by him and said, "Oh, do you have the time, sir?" And so he brought out his pocket watch, which was made of high-quality silver, and he told the man what time it was. And he noticed about this gentleman who asked him what time it was, that he was really eyeing up that pocket watch. And the gentleman had a sickle, so he was obviously a worker in the field. But he didn't think too much of it and went on his way and started to make his way out into the wild. And just a little bit past that town, he noticed a man walk past him with a sickle. And it was that very same dude that had asked him what time it was. And sure enough, just a little bit down the road, there was a gate ahead of him and some hills with tall grass. And he thought that he could see some movement in the grass. He thought it was an animal, perhaps. But he knew that it was a man crouched down, running, trying to hide in the grass. And he saw way up ahead on the road that this man ran from one side of the road to the other and was hiding right by the road. And sure enough, it was the man with the sickle. Now, this is an older minister out there by himself with nothing and nobody but his horse. And so he began to realize that this guy was going to rob him and maybe even kill him for that silver pocket watch and anything else he might have. And he wasn't sure what he was going to do. He had to go to this village to preach, and he knew it was his duty, and he wasn't going to turn back. And so he began thinking of the different ways he could try to escape. Could he just make a run for it? But the gate was closed, so he surely couldn't do that. And there was no way out, so he finally just prayed for God's protection upon him. And as he finished praying, his horse started. And so he pulled in the reins and pulled him back. And he happened to look over, and to his shock, there was a horseman right next to him, as if he'd sprung right out of the earth. Dazzling white horse, and the rider with dark black clothing on. And he was filled with wonder. He didn't know where this guy came from. But quickly his mind turned that, maybe this guy was going to help him out. And sure enough, as he began talking to this mysterious gentleman on the horse next to him, he couldn't get a word out of him. He was describing the situation. He's like, "Hey, there's a guy up there. I think he wants to rob me, and I'm not sure what I should do." And as he's looking at the horseman, he couldn't get a word out of him. And as he saw his face, he could tell the horseman wasn't really paying any attention to what he was saying, but he had his eyes fixed on the man who was hiding and who was fixing to rob him. And sure enough, as they waited after a couple minutes, the man spotted them and ran off over the hill and abandoned his attempt to rob this minister. And so the minister, he's still trying to talk to this guy. He's using English, he's using Welsh. He can't get a single word out of this guy. Until he told him, "Can there be any doubt that the Lord heard my prayer and that it was the Lord who sent you to protect me?" And the only word he heard out of this horseman was right after he said that, and he thought he heard him say, "Amen." The horseman rode with him up to the gate, still not saying anything, even though he kept trying to talk to him. And the minister got off his carriage, went up to open the gate, and as soon as he opened the gate to look back and let the horseman in, he was gone. Just as quickly as he had appeared, he vanished. And he could see like half a mile down the road, and he couldn't see him anywhere. There was no trace of this horseman. And as he continued his ride and thought about what had happened, he tried to ignore, he tried to convince himself that this was perfectly normal, that this was just some stranger who happened to chance upon him and ran off through the woods before he could see him and got the perfect escape. But he knew that this was no ordinary rider. And as he reviewed the facts in his head, what really stuck out to him was this, that he never got a word out of the guy except when he mentioned the name of the Lord. That it drew forth that one word, almost as though this mysterious character couldn't help but say it. Amen. Now you might have some ideas about what kind of horseman that was. I certainly do. I think that gentleman entertained an angel unawares. But what sticks out to me is that dude was not only all business, but he was a man of very few words, and he only used one. Amen. If an angel like that was to use the word amen at the mention of the name of the Lord, it means something to him. He knows about God. He knows about the fear of the Lord. He knows about the majesty of the true and living God who made everything. He knows what it's like to be in His presence. He knows the somber and sober quietness of what it is to walk in the courts of the Almighty. And He used the word that we throw around sometimes. Amen. I don't think we know who we're dealing with the Lord sometimes. But He is certainly gracious to us. And this word should find its place with weight upon our lips and upon our speech.